My name is Olivia Bennett, and if you saw me today, you'd probably think I've had it easy. From the outside, my life looks picture perfect. My office sits on the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. The city stretches out beneath me, silver, blue, alive with possibility. My silk blouse still carries the faint scent of lavender from this morning's steam, and my coffee, still warm on the mahogany desk, is untouched because my phone won't stop buzzing. I glance at the screen. Another missed call. Another voicemail. This time from my mother. Funny, isn't it? The same parents who once brushed off my victories as insignificant now dial my number like their lives depend on it. Maybe because, in a way, they do. I press my thumb against the screen, silencing the vibration. The irony isn't lost on me. When I won that scholarship years ago, the one I fought tooth and nail for, they barely looked up from their evening news. "That's nice, Olivia," my father had said, as though I'd just announced I'd folded the laundry. Back then, their approval felt like oxygen. When I didn't get it, I thought I might suffocate. Now, I breathe just fine without them. In fact, I breathe better. But today, hearing their voices crackle through my phone, begging me for help, well, that's the trigger. That's what drags me back into a story I thought I'd closed forever. I was 18 when it happened, the first time I realized that my dreams would never be safe in my parents' hands. It was senior year, and I had just come home clutching a letter with the university seal on top. The envelope trembled in my grip. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. When I tore it open and read the words, "Congratulations, you've been awarded a full scholarship," my knees nearly buckled. I ran into the living room, holding the paper like it was the crown jewel of my existence. "Mom, Dad, I got it. I really got it." My voice cracked with joy. My mother didn't even look up from folding laundry. "That's nice, Olivia. But are you sure that's practical? Scholarships can be tricky. What if they change their minds?" My father, sitting in his recliner with a TV humming behind him, barely glanced at the letter. "You're overexcited. It's just school. Don't get ahead of yourself." The sting was instant. My throat closed up, and my fingers shook as I held out the paper, desperate for them to see what this meant. But they didn't. To them, it was just another piece of paper. That night, I cried into my pillow until it was damp and heavy. I wanted someone to tell me I mattered, that my hard work had been worth it. Instead, the silence of my room was my only witness. It wasn't until my grandmother, Evelyn, called me later that week that I felt the universe hadn't forgotten me. She had always believed in me. She listened to my halting voice, to my excitement tangled with hurt. "Oh, Olivia," she said softly, "don't you ever let someone else's blindness dim your light. They don't see it because they can't. But I do. And one day, the whole world will." She mailed me a small silver pendant a few days later, a delicate star on a thin chain. "Wear it," she wrote in the note. "A reminder that you shine, even when others refuse to look up." That necklace became my anchor. Every time I doubted myself, I touched it and remembered her words. So when my parents dismissed me yet again a month later, this time when I told them I was moving out to take the scholarship, I didn't fight back. I just packed my bags, slipped the star pendant around my neck, and walked out the front door. It was the first step toward a life they would never expect. When I moved into my tiny dorm room that fall, I felt equal parts free and terrified. The walls were bare, the mattress thin, and the air smelled faintly of bleach and old paint. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, the silence around me wasn't laced with judgment. Still, freedom had a price. Between classes, part-time jobs, and endless assignments, I often ate instant noodles for dinner, stretching a $10 bill farther than I thought humanly possible. Some nights, I cried quietly into my textbooks, the pendant around my neck cool against my skin. I would whisper, "Grandma, I hope you're right. I hope I can make it." Then came the moment that changed everything. During my sophomore year, I attended a networking event, mostly to grab free snacks, and I met Margaret Lane, a seasoned entrepreneur with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that made people lean in when she spoke. She caught me staring at her polished presentation boards, and instead of brushing me off like so many others did, She smiled. You look curious. Do you design? I stammered, admitting I'd been teaching myself graphic design and coding late at night. Instead of laughing, she nodded. Good. Curiosity and grit will take you farther than talent alone. That was the beginning. Margaret became my mentor, pushing me harder than I thought possible. She introduced me to my first freelance client, a small bakery that needed a rebrand. I worked on their logo and website until my eyes burned, and when they handed me that first check, only $300, I clutched it like it was a golden ticket. One client turned into three. Three turned into 10. I worked late into the night, fueled by caffeine and determination, balancing lectures with deadlines. I made mistakes, plenty of them. Once, I sent the wrong file to a client and thought my career was over. But Margaret reminded me, perfection isn't power, Olivia. Consistency is. By the time I graduated, my little side hustle had blossomed into a budding digital agency. I rented a small office above a coffee shop, furnished with thrift store finds and a secondhand computer. No one knew, not even my parents. I kept my social media posts vague, a filtered picture of my coffee cup, a blurry sunset, never the long nights or the steady growth of my business. My parents thought I was scraping by, maybe teaching or working retail, and I let them believe it, because in a strange way, their indifference fueled me. Every dismissal, every shrug of their shoulders became kindling for the fire inside me. By 25, I signed my first six-figure contract. At 27, I moved my company into a downtown high-rise. At 28, I bought my own condo overlooking Lake Michigan. And all the while I wore that little silver star pendant. Quiet, steady, shining. They had ignored my first win. But I was building a future they wouldn't be able to ignore forever. The day my parents finally showed up at my doorstep, the sky over Chicago was streaked with gray, heavy with rain. I had just wrapped a meeting with a tech client when the doorman called upstairs. Ms. Bennett, your parents are here. For a second, I froze. My parents had never once visited me in the city. Not when I graduated. Not when I opened my first office. Not when I bought my condo. Never. And now, suddenly, they were standing in the marble-floored lobby of my building. I took a slow breath, adjusted the lapel of my tailored blazer, and told security to let them up. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped out looking smaller than I remembered. My mother's hair had thinned, her coat looked worn, and my father's eyes darted nervously around the pristine hallway. Olivia, my mother started, her voice already trembling. We needed to see you. Things at home, they've gotten hard. Your father lost his job and the bills. Her words trailed off as they stepped inside my condo. The silence that followed was deafening. Their eyes swept across the wide windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the curated art on the walls, the sleek furniture softened with personal touches, a woven throw Grandma Evelyn had given me, a framed photo of my first office team, a shelf lined with business awards. I could see it hitting them piece by piece, like puzzle pieces falling into place. My father finally found his voice. This is yours. Yes, I said simply, pouring myself a glass of water. The sound of the ice clinking echoed in the stillness. But how? My mother's voice cracked. We thought you were just managing somehow. I smiled, a small, controlled smile that carried years of buried hurt. That's because you never asked. You assumed. You never wanted to hear about my wins. They looked at each other, shame flickering across their faces. I set the glass down carefully on the counter. I run Bennett & Company, a digital agency. We've handled campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. We have offices in 3 states. Last year, we crossed 8 figures in revenue. The silence after that was almost cruel. Their mouths parted slightly, eyes wide, the weight of disbelief dragging them down. My father swallowed hard. Olivia, we didn't know. No, you didn't want to know. My voice stayed calm, but every word was sharp. When I got that scholarship, you brushed it off. When I told you I was moving out, you said nothing. Do you have any idea what that did to me? How it felt to have my own parents act like my hard work meant nothing. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We were wrong. We didn't realize. I cut her off, my hand brushing the pendant around my neck. You didn't realize because you didn't care enough to look. Grandma Evelyn believed in me when you didn't. That's why I'm here. That's why I made it. The room hung heavy with their guilt, the sound of the rain against the glass filling the space they couldn't. Finally, my father lowered himself onto the couch, rubbing his temples. We need help, Olivia. We can't keep up with the bills. We might lose the house. I stood tall, letting the silence stretch. For years, I had waited for this moment, the moment they would finally see me. And now they had no choice but to. I looked at my parents, the people who had once dismissed my biggest victory like it was nothing more than a grocery list, now sitting in my living room asking for my help. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to let them feel the sting of being ignored. But another part, the wiser, calmer woman I had become, knew that revenge wasn't power. Control was. I pulled out a chair and sat across from them, folding my hands in my lap. I can help you, I said evenly. But it won't be the way you expect. My mother leaned forward eagerly. We'll do anything. Just please, Olivia. I studied her, remembering all the times she told me not to dream too big. Then I turned to my father, who once laughed when I said I wanted to build my own company. You'll need to change, I said firmly. Both of you. My father frowned. Change? What do you mean? I leaned in. First, no more dismissing people's dreams. Not mine, not anyone's. From now on, you encourage, you don't belittle. Second, you both need to start working again. Not for the money, but for yourselves. Find something meaningful. Volunteer, part-time work, I don't care. But no more sitting in silence, waiting for life to pass you by. They exchanged uncertain glances. And lastly, I continued, my voice softening but staying steady, you need to acknowledge the damage you caused. Not just with words, with actions. I'll help with the bills, but only if you start showing up for me, for each other, for the future. My mother's lip trembled. Olivia, we were blind. We thought we were protecting you from disappointment, but instead, we became the disappointment. For the first time, I saw honesty in her eyes. My father's shoulders slumped, his voice rough. We don't deserve your help. But if you'll give us another chance, we'll try. I nodded slowly, my hand instinctively brushing the pendant at my throat. Trying is the only thing I ever needed from you. The room was quiet, save for the sound of the rain tapering off outside. I rose and walked toward the wide windows, the city lights flickering awake against the fading storm. You can move into one of my rental properties temporarily, I said over my shoulder. I'll cover the bills until you stabilize. But I'm not your safety net. I'm your reminder of what happens when you believe in someone. When I turned back, their eyes were wet with tears, but this time, not from shame alone. From relief. From possibility. And in that moment, I realized the shift had happened. They no longer held power over me. I held it over them. But instead of using it to crush them, I was using it to lift them, on my terms. For once, they would have to follow my lead. The weeks that followed were strange, almost surreal. For the first time in my life, my parents began calling me not to criticize, not to lecture, but simply to talk. My mother would tell me about the community center, where she had started volunteering, helping younger kids with reading. My father had picked up part-time work at a hardware store, something he hadn't done since his 20s. It wasn't perfect. Old habits don't vanish overnight. There were moments when my father's pride still got in the way, or when my mother's voice carried that familiar edge of doubt. But now, when I reminded them of our agreement, they listened. And they tried again. One Sunday afternoon, I visited them at the small rental property I had arranged. It wasn't lavish, a modest 2-bedroom with peeling paint, but it was warm, lived in theirs. My mother had baked banana bread, and the smell filled the kitchen. My father, of all people, was fixing a loose cabinet door with a screwdriver. As I stood in the doorway watching them, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later that night, back in my condo, I sat by the window overlooking the shimmering city. The pendant around my neck caught the light, glinting like a tiny star. I held it between my fingers and thought of Grandma Evelyn, the only person who had seen me clearly when I felt invisible. She had told me once that the world would see my light someday. She was right. But what she didn't say was that when it happened, the people who ignored it might come running back, desperate to share in its warmth. And that's the choice I had faced, to shut them out forever, or to let them earn a place in the glow. I chose the latter, not because they deserved it, but because I did. Because strength isn't just about standing tall when others doubt you. It's about deciding, with grace, how to use the power you've earned. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights sparkling like constellations across the lake. My lips curved into a quiet smile as I whispered the truth I had carried for so long. They ignored my win, but now they depend on my money. And on my terms, I'll make sure they never forget who I became.